I'm Bernie Beitman, and I'm talking with you about one of my favorite subjects, synchronicity, and particularly asking you some questions here. These are questions I have for you about your experience of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, and serendipity. And this question is, when you look at your patterns of synchronicity stories, do you see any underlying themes? Are there some variables that seem to cluster under the same idea? And today I'll give you some idea about at least three of them. One of them has to do with what you are seeking is also seeking you. This is one of those remarkable facts about this reality, first articulated by the poet Rumi. How does this happen? We don't know and make guesses, but the fact is it does happen, and it may happen to you. And if it does happen to you, as I will describe some more details a little later, let us know. Another pattern that is not uncommon that people experience and that I have experienced to a great deal of degree myself is involvement with strangers. Strangers. And I mean people you don't know or people you variably know, don't know very well. And somehow these strangers end up having a remarkable impact on your life. And I'll give you some examples of that. So what you are seeking is also seeking you, the remarkable help of strangers. And the third one we'll talk about today is internal GPS. It's getting to where you need to be by intuition rather than using the GPS thing in your car or on your phone. It's getting to where you need to be and somehow not having a clear rationale for how you got there, and yet you did. So these are three patterns that are not uncommon, in fact, fairly common across coincidences. And I'll describe some of the detail. And again, I'm asking you, do these fit you? Any of these fit you? And are there other patterns that do fit you that I am not listing here? For the question of, or the principle of, or the pattern of what you are seeking is seeking you, a need you have and a need somebody else has gets fulfilled. For example, this guy didn't want to go to the wedding of his ex-girlfriend, but he thought he would and ended up late, missed the ceremony, but arrived enough for the dinner. What do you know? And there was only one seat left. And sat down and kind of embarrassed, and the man next to him started talking with him. And as they talked, the person I'm describing, let's call him Jack, mentioned that he was a graduate student and had just finished his degree work and needed a job. And the person he was sitting next to said, "What degree are you getting, or did you get?" And Jack tells him, and the guy says, "We're looking for somebody with just those qualifications." Sitting down next to a stranger is one of those common need-fulfilling coincidences. Another example, a woman was an opera singer. She loved singing opera, and decided to go to a tryout, and ended up waiting for a while until they called her in. And she said, "No, and they said, no, the opera tryouts are for tomorrow. Today it's for a musical." And they said, "Well, why don't you try out for the musical?" And she did, and she got the part, and it turned out that was the better role for her, to be in a musical rather than to be in an opera. So each part of that equation got a need fulfilled, this time because the woman ended up coming at the wrong time. That's related to internal GPS. Um, and this internal GPS is, as I've mentioned, getting to where you need to be using intuition, or another way of saying it, without knowing how you got there. And some of the ways that you get there are kind of surprising to you when you get there. And a couple of examples of that. A woman came home to look for her 6-year-old from the babysitter. The babysitter had supposedly been home with the child. And when the woman got home, the babysitter said, no, she's not here. She's with her friend next door. Well, the mother went next door, knocked on the door and said, where's Doris? And the mother of the other child said, she's not here. I don't know where they went. Well, something overcame that mother, and she got in her car, raced over to a park that she'd not been to before, and ran down a trail in that park to a quarry. And there at the edge of the quarry, you know, quarries can get pretty deep, was her daughter and her friend about to go wading in the quarry. So the mother arrived just in time. Her internal GPS got her to where she needed to be at just the right time. You know that dogs find their way home, and cats can do the same thing, and birds know how to get where they need to get in the winter and in the summer. Animals have this capacity, so why don't we? Well, we do, and maybe do you? Do you have stories in which you have, just without thinking about it, but moving, gotten to the place where you needed to be without a map, just something internal to you that got you there? I've got some theories about how that might happen in the human brain, but that would be for another time. Another and somewhat similar story was of a 17-year-old who took her parents' car and took her father's gun and drove out to a lake in a desolated area somewhat near her town. And she was sitting in the car contemplating whether or not to pull the trigger. As she was thinking about that, another car pulled up right next to her, and she looked over, and it was her brother. And her brother had never been in this spot, and neither had the 17-year-old young woman. And so she said, how come you're here? And he said, I just felt I needed to come. And that saved her life and allowed her to be able to tell me and other people this story about internal GPS operating. These are capacities that don't get usually recognized by modern science, but maybe you recognize that in yourself hearing these stories. So please let us know, is this the kind of pattern of your coincidence stories that fits your experience? The last one for today has to do with strangers. Strangers are strange in the sense that sometimes these things happen with strangers that are really hard to understand, but they do. I mean, I gave you the story about the guy showing up at the wedding and sitting next to somebody he didn't know, and that's another variation on the stranger theme. And it's not uncommon, and our weird coincidence survey has suggested it, that people are introduced to other people who unexpectedly further their work, career, and education. Well, one great story of that was of a graduate of the University of Virginia who had an ideal job in mind. She knew who she wanted to work with. And she had no idea about how to contact this person because she was fairly insulated from outside contact. But that's who she wanted to work for. Well, she was in LaGuardia Airport in outside of New York City and saw the woman that she had in mind walk by. Now, here's another part of meaningful coincidences is to be able to act in the moment. This was serendipity. Her mind had the idea about this other woman to be contacting. And so serendipity often requires you to seize the moment, to seize that opportunity. She went up to the woman, introduced herself, and got a job working for her. That doesn't work all the time, but it makes it a nicer story when the chance meeting actually ends up with a job. Some of them don't. I mean, nothing's 100% in these things, but the probabilities increase greatly that she could work for this woman by starting to be able to talk with her. One of the other variations on strangers is knocking on a stranger's door. I was I didn't know where what to do research wise when I was leaving the University of Washington, and the person I want to say goodbye to was not exactly a stranger. I knew him, but there was something a little bit difficult about knocking on Wayne Caton's door and saying goodbye to him as I was leaving the University of Washington. But I did. I knocked on that door. And this is to say that perhaps for you, knocking on doors, particularly strangers or uncomfortable knocks, are ways in which you enter a portal. A door is a portal. Sometimes open it up, and what you'll find on the other side can be quite amazing if you take the chance. In this case, I found a research paradigm that Wayne had developed, an outline of the research that he was doing, a one-page thing about chest pain and panic disorder, and a paper on his desk that described the relationship between chest pain and psychiatric disorders. Well, I got the protocol from Wayne and went to the University of Missouri, and that enabled me to do at least 40 papers to become probably the most widely published person in this very small area, chest pain and panic disorder, this overlap between cardiology and psychiatry. And that allowed me to have enough of the academic credentials to become chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Missouri. That's from knocking on the door. And there could have been other doors, other ways, but Wayne became very famous for this kind of research later. And there weren't any other doors that would have led me to this kind of gold mine of potential research avenues. The sitting down next to strangers has to have happened to you at least sometime. Uh, one of the most common ones besides getting a job sitting next to a stranger, even more common is sitting next to somebody who becomes your romantic partner. I love those I love those stories. Romance is a real fun thing about how it happens. One example was a guy who was bored uh, working where he was working on an island in one of the Hawaiian islands, and he just got on his motorcycle and started riding. And then he saw somebody on the beach and decided to go over there. And again, he acted. One of the key things with helping coincidences to become meaningful is your acting. And maybe you can tell me stories about where you could have acted, because I've heard of those, where you didn't act, where you decided not to. It's 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 like the opposite of getting pulled over for reckless driving. Uh, it's you didn't do anything reckless. In fact, you didn't take the chance and didn't get whatever opportunity might have been there had you taken that chance. So romantic partners, sitting down next to somebody in an airplane, Uh, those are not uncommon. And maybe it's happened to you. So let us know. And so the final series of these strangers ones that can get really amazing, sitting down next to somebody that you can understand that. But um, the third man or third person phenomenon, sometimes called a guardian angel, stories of people being lost and not knowing where to go, and somebody shows up and says, go this way, and you go this way and you're saved. And then you look around for the person who gave you the advice, and that person isn't in there, isn't there. You can't see them. Another story of somebody about to be robbed. Uh, and I'll do it, Dad. What do you need? What do you need? And a stranger comes up and threatens the robber, and the robber walks off. And then the potential victim said, who was that? And runs around the corner to see if she can see anybody, or he can see anybody. There's nobody there. So these guardian angels or third man stories are not uncommon. Has anything like that happened to you? Uh, some are not quite that mysterious. It's still kind of strange how it happens, and it still boggles my mind. And I wonder if you have this kind of experience yourself, that you're in the midst of making a decision. Um, you don't know what to do with yourself. There are possibilities. I heard one story about a bank clerk terribly bored with his job, trying to give people loans and decide whether they will pay them back or not, and other very organized, detailed, and for him boring jobs. One person came in talking to him about money, and she said to him, "You know, you should be on television. You'd be a great host on public television." And she gave him a suggestion about where to go. And he became an award-winning producer and director of public television. Unsolicited advice from somebody that yielded large outcomes. That I, how does that happen? Why did she tell him? How did she show up? I don't know. Those are the kinds of questions I like to ask, but I don't have answers. Have you had a stranger come up to you? Uh, Somebody was going through the line to get some donuts. She was in her car and she was at the window about ready to get the donuts, and the person in the window said, without anything being asked, you need to take the job you're just being offered. Now, how did that person channel that answer, we'll say, to, or somehow come up with that, or intuitively grasp the question of the other person? We're all in this together more than we realize, and these examples tend to show us how that works. Another example like that was a young woman asking for a sign from a higher power about whether to start an Airbnb. She's walking down the streets, this is in New York City, and some person starts saying hi to her, and she stops to see what are they talking about, and he starts talking about how he started an Airbnb and how it was very successful, and she did too. That was another suggestion from her. So sometimes the messages come kind of indirectly just by somebody talking about something. You even may hear it in a crowd. Somehow that sound of that person's voice gets louder and your mind tunes into it. And you say, okay, maybe that is the sign that I was looking for, or the suggestion that I needed, and I'll go for it. So here we've talked about three coincidence patterns. What you are seeking is seeking you. Internal GPS, getting to where you need to be through intuition and not through any rational map. And the many different ways strangers come into our lives to be of some assistance to us. So do these patterns fit you? Do you have other patterns? Do you have just a knocking on the door one? Do you have other ones sitting down next to strangers? Do you recognize when your need is being fulfilled by someone else who also has a reciprocal need? Let me know. So it's been a pleasure talking with you about this. This is a part of my effort to organize, systematize the general principles that seem to govern synchronicity. This is without trying to say how they happen. It raises the question, but it's more about that they happen. And if we continue to study meaningful coincidences like this, we begin to see patterns in the mind of the general public, your mind, other people's minds, and get to know the group mind of humanity. And maybe that will help us understand ways to get out of the mess that we are creating for ourselves these days. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.